A while ago, I bought the new KZ PR2, the newest planar driver from KZ in cooperation with the YouTuber HBB, I think he's called. And it finally got delivered. And of course, the PR2 is now part of the next issue with KZ doing sketchy stuff. If you haven't heard, in the past, KZ sold IEMs that were marketed with having so and so many drivers, and you can even like buy them now on Amazon or wherever you want. Like they would have like one dynamic and 7 balanced armatures on each side, so like a lot of drivers in one IEM. And after a while, some people noticed that some of the balanced armatures, so the drivers that are mostly responsible for like upper mid-range treble, like some, yeah, I don't know if you want to call that detail, but just like the upper frequency response. And again, after a while, some people noticed that these drivers were basically glued shut and did not really do anything besides looking cool when it comes to marketing and selling. It did get kind of resolved after a while with the drivers actually having a minimum impact, and basically Casey said it was intended like that. So what happened now with the PR2? If you look at the frequency response of this IEM, it should actually sound pretty relaxed in the treble, because that was what AHBB actually intended to do, since the original PR1, which I did a review for, was kind of piercing and peaking sometimes. It had kind of the typical KZ upper treble, which can be too much for people who are sensitive there, and even for listeners who don't want their cymbals to be really present in the mix. So I was kind of confused when the PR2 still sounded somewhat boosted in the treble, because even though I wouldn't say I had like the perfect hearing or anything, but what I heard did not translate into the frequency response I looked at when it came to the upper treble. The rest was fine and actually kind of was what I was thinking, yeah, I hear that. But this was kind of confusing. The treble was not as boosted as it was on the PR2, but still, again, more than the measurements showed. Other people noticed that too, mentioning sibilants and stuff that should not be there with the relaxed treble. So what happened here is that there is already a version 1 and a version 2 of the PR2 out there. The version 1 had the treble sound that it should have, that you can see on the first frequency response that was released. And the V2, which I have here, actually has the boosted treble. This happened because the version 1 actually has a little mesh plate in front of the driver that you can see from the outside. And guess what? I have the version 2 without the mesh. So my PR2 from the outside looks actually pretty similar, like what you can see in the shell here, looks pretty similar to the PR1. But the version 1 with the relaxed treble of the PR2 has a little mesh plate in front of the magnet array that you can see here. That's this little plate that you can see there. With the version 1, there is like a mesh plate over there. So you can actually see pretty easily if you've got delivered the version 1 or the version 2. They apparently changed that without saying anything, because production could not keep up with the orders, and apparently it's kind of difficult to put the mesh in there and takes more time, and therefore I guess it takes more money to put into production to build it that way. So transparency at its best here, because in contrast to their opinion, it actually does change the sound quite a bit. So I just wanted you to know that, because my review will be based on the version 2 I have here, and that is currently being sold. I don't think they've reversed production back to the version 1, but maybe I'm not like on the latest news there. So, but if you buy the PR2 now, I would expect to get the version 2. Yeah, just wanted to throw that out before the review. And again, let's just start with build quality like always. The overall design of the PR2 is pretty similar to the PR1, with just a different looking backplate with like a different design of the vents here. but overall you have the same see-through shell, you get the same cable, at least the same looking one, and just the overall shape is basically the same. Like the PR1, it does have kind of an industrial look, and I really like these shells where you can look into the IEM. Also, I think they use just the same material, so that is pretty good for a €50, $50 IEM, because this one here is really solid and does not feel cheap at all. So being honest here, build quality is really quite good for that money. The cable is fine, it did tangle up a bit while I was using the IEM for a few weeks, but I guess that's my fault, because like putting it into your pocket and everything. Besides that, it's just your typical KZ cable, it works, I haven't had any issues with that one here. Talking about comfort, again, just like the PR1, these are pretty comfortable. They are not too bulky and they fit really well on my ears. I have no issues here with them moving around or even falling out. The included foam tips are okay, like I don't really remember because I unboxed these like 2 months ago, but I think you just get foam tips. Yeah, and they were okay, but I like these black kind of silicone tips from KZ a lot more. Actually, the foam tips change the sound a bit more in a way that is not to my liking, like it just make the mid-range a little bit weird. So I went with the silicone ones. That being said, it's not like they completely disappear. They are not like the Tangzu Waner, for example, which are even more comfortable. But again, these are fine, and I don't think most people will have any issues here. So how does the PR2 sound? Again, there are two versions out there, and you can actually find the measurements to both of them. The version 1 is the one that HPB intended to tune and did tune, and the one that has a more relaxed treble frequency response. And the version 2 that is currently out there and that's being sold has the treble boost. As usual, let's start with the bass. The PR2 has kind of a U shape, again, just like the PR1. So most of the bass boost is in the lower bass and then rolls off into the mid bass and into the higher bass, where it does bleed just a little bit into the lower mid range, but it is done quite nicely. So there is a little warmth there, but the overall sound does not sound thin or muddy or anything. I mean, I guess maybe if you want to have like a lot of bass, then the PR1 would be better here, but the PR2 actually has, and what I would say, more quality and cleaner bass. It does not bleed into the mid-range as much as the bass on the PR1 does. You do not have this bass veil that lies over everything, and this makes the mid-range even more distant than it is with like other more U or V shaped IEMs. Like the PR2 does not do that. It still has that elevation in the bass region, but it's not that strong. Like it is there and it's fun, but I would not say this is a bass heavy IEM, not at all. It's done really well here. You can like the bass, but you can also like appreciate instruments in the mid range and everything, and it's just all really nicely consumerishly balanced out. And please remember, I'm talking about the balanced version of the PR1, so the bassy version. There are quite a few versions out there, the Pro version and the Hi-Fi version, which both have less bass. PR1 balances the bassy one. And again, this does have less bass, but the quality sounds better and it's still present enough. Getting more into the different bass sections, the mid bass here is less boomy and it's just a little less fat and warm, but the sub bass is nicely present but has just a little less rumble, but hits pretty hard and stays clean. So it's just a pretty nicely balanced out bass here. Going into the mid range, it's pretty smooth. Instruments and voices never sound harsh but still have this energy in them. And again, because the bass doesn't muddy up the mid-range that much, you can really enjoy everything that falls into that frequency range here. Especially instruments like guitars can sound a little more distant than drum hits, but overall everything sounds pretty natural and not plasticky or anything, a problem that you sometimes have with planar IEMs. Going into the upper mid-range, the PR2 is again not as intense to your ears as a lot of other IEMs, but it's certainly not laid back. You just do not have this over-the-top energy at around 2K that makes voices sometimes too shouty and unpleasant. You do not get this with the PR2. I really like the mid-range on the PR2 because it's never too much, but it's still not boring. So like I said in the beginning, treble in my version is different than it was in the first version. It's not as laid back as the graph you can find online. Again, nowadays you can find the graph for the second version, but when I bought it, there was just the one for the first version out there. It is actually quite present. Not annoyingly so, at least for my ears, and not as much as in the PR1, but still noticeably so. So that makes cymbal hits definitely stand out. You can even hear some sibilance from time to time. This can be a deal breaker for people who bought these things thinking they will get like a safe version of the PR2. But if you like a little extra airiness in the treble, you may even like that change. So what I like about the tuning is that they were able to make a really good U or V shape without the typical issues of having bloated bass or a screeching upper mid-range. Treble here in this version 2 is a matter of taste, but it's still acceptable and not overdone. Like, it's not extremely boosted, it's just more than I expected when I got these. You can enjoy many different genres with the PR2, and it will always sound fun and not be an attack on your ears. They still made safe tuning here. You have this boosted bass that's not too much, you have the smooth mid-range that is not boring but is still not, that does not have the most extreme attack there with instruments, and nothing shouts at you. Yeah, you can hear the cymbal strikes are sometimes a little intense, and again, sibilance with female voices is maybe a bit too present there, but it's still better than a lot of other U-shaped IEMs. Regarding technicalities, these are surprisingly capable for €50, and I struggle to find a better one at this price point. Soundstage is kind of difficult with IEMs. I would say for an IEM, it does not sound too close. With a slightly boosted treble, it sounds more open and has a nice depth to it, so not everything has kind of the same distance here. You can actually hear differences. Imaging is pretty good, and everything is clearly separated. You can even hear the smaller things with ambient stuff, for example, that like moves around in the background. I actually think it's just a better PA1 here, and at least where I'm living, the PA1 is double that price, and I think it's just kind of the same technical stuff, and that's why it's pretty good for the €50 that you have to pay for this one here. I thought I'm gonna include this little comparison section here. Well, these are €50, so maybe you started with a cheaper IEM, maybe you started with the 7Hz Zero or the Tangzu Waner, which are pretty famous nowadays and kind of half the price of this one. So I thought I'm gonna just talk about the differences between these three IEMs. So obviously the PR2 has a different tuning. It has more bass presence and quality than both of the other ones I mentioned. And the 7Hz Zero has this harsh upper mid-range and the weak bass, where the PR2 is just less exhausting to listen to. And it sounds overall a little less aggressive in the mid-range. It does not have this metallic sound that you get when you have a little too much energy at 1, 2, 3K. It's fatter sounding, like you have a more warm sound, but not too much. And again, it's just way less neutral. The PR2 has a tuning that a lot of people can enjoy. The Tangzu Waner has this really smooth sound and sounds even more relaxed than the PR2, and especially regarding the little boost in the treble that the PR2 has. So, but still the PR2 has more bass. The bass here hits harder, like the Waner has for the price. It's a really nice IEM. but you can tell that this one is like a step above that, maybe even 2. Especially on the technical level, the PR2 is a big step above those two. Kind of imagine a picture getting sharper. That's what you get here with these. And a less neutral sound. So that's it with this review. I hope could give you some information here. And yeah, let me know if you bought the PR2 or what you think it sounds like, if you liked it, and so on and so on. See you next time.